It was an ordinary painting of a tearful child, yet it surprisingly made the focal point of the most widespread attention in the UK during the late 20th century. Commonly known as the Crying Boy, this artwork, according to its sudden mass popularity during the post-war period, reached into thousands of mass-produced prints hung in homes across the country. First of all, the Crying Boy looked like nothing more than a sentimental piece of decor, destined to evoke sympathy in anyone for the helpless child it depicted. But over time, this painting took on a name associated with a far more ominous reputation, a reputation that would shock the nation. It wasn't until the 1980s that a spate of unexplained house fires catapulted the Crying Boy into the public consciousness for all the wrong reasons. It appeared that reports started trickling in that homes, wherein the Crying Boy painting was hanging on their walls, mysteriously caught fire, with the painting itself showing little in the line of damage. This eerie survival of the painting amidst the devastation convinced many that the painting was cursed. Public fascination was perpetuated with media interest, and the Crying Boy went from being a loved picture to one that became a bad omen, carrying a great deal of misfortune and fear with it. The following investigation explores the history of the Crying Boy, how it came to be put in the context of household disasters, and the cultural, psychological, and scientific explanation for such a happening. The history behind the painting, called the Crying Boy. The story of the Crying Boy begins with the Italian painter Giovanni Bragolin, much more popular under his pseudonym Bruno Amadio. Bragolin was born in Venice and pursued a traditional painter career in post-Second World War Europe, a time when the continent struggled to come to terms with war aftermath, poverty, and social disarray. His earlier works, like most other European artists of this post-war period, demonstrated the all-sweeping traumatic sorrow that had enveloped the population. Perhaps the most radical turn of his career was when Amadio decided to paint a series of portraits featuring crying children, most famously titled The Crying Boy. It is said that Amadio was inspired by immense suffering he witnessed in orphanages where countless children had been displaced because of the war. He did this to reveal just how innocent these war-stricken children were and the tragedy that befell them, just raw emotion throughout his series that resonated with the public. The portraits of the children come from different walks of life, all show large teary eyes and faces that express deep sadness. As Bragolin's paintings gained popularity, they were mass-produced in print form, particularly in the UK. By the time of the 1960s and 70s, these prints were being sold through department stores and were hung in homes across Europe and beyond. Many families found the image of the tearful boy deeply affecting, a reflection of the universal themes of loss and sorrow. What was to be a tribute to the misery of children would soon become something far more sinister in the public imagination: the spread of the myth. The transformation from harmless art into cursed object had started during the early 1980s, when the British tabloid The Sun ran a sensation about the Crying Boy painting being linked to a number of unexplained house fires. The report said that by then, firefighters had already started observing something very worrying. In several fire-damaged houses, the Crying Boy painting had survived very intact, even while everything else around was reduced to ashes. The first reported case involved a family from Rotherham who literally saw their home go up in flames. When the fire had been extinguished and they sifted through the wreckage, one of the only objects to survive the fire relatively unscathed was a print of the Crying Boy. Over the course of the next several years, other stories began to trickle in. In each case, families reported that their homes had literally been reduced to ashes by fire, yet the painting of the tearful child seemed impervious to the blaze. The Sun afterwards ran almost weekly follow-up pieces, printing more stories along with interviews with people who claimed to have first-hand experience with the curse. Framing headlines such as those in The Sun suggested to readers that more than mere coincidence was operating to inspire fear in the public. Those people started to feel and believe that the painting was bringing them bad luck, actually that it was cursed. With the chronicles of fires continuing, so did the myth. The Crying Boy soon was thought of as a poster child for bad luck. The idea of the painting having prowess to bring along disaster hovered deep in the public minds. People started taking the painting off their homes in hope that these catastrophes would not happen with them. investigation into the house fires. Now, to understand the phenomenon, we need to deal with those certain cases where the painting, The Crying Boy, was present amidst the ruins of a house fire. There is something common in these incidents that looks really weird at first sight. Many houses faced devastating fires which burnt nearly everything to cinders, whereas the Crying Boy paintings mostly came out intact. How could it be with an ordinary painting? Any analysis of such events would include examining conditions related to fire and how those conditions interacted with materials in the home. Fire naturally is volatile, and its spread depends on a number of factors: airflow, object placement, and materials present in the space. Forensic fire analysts were called in to examine the remains of some of the homes that had been affected. This was in a view to establish whether anything strange could be attributed to the fire, and therefore, why the paintings were not affected. In most, they found that the cause of a fire could be traced back to common household accidents, faulty wiring, unattended cooking, or flammable materials stored improperly. There was nothing supernatural about the origins of the fires themselves, yet the survival of the paintings revealed a more difficult mystery. Investigators noted that the paintings were often mounted on walls, away from the immediate path of fire. The nature of specific materials used to create the prints may have added to their resilience. The varnish applied to the surface of paintings acted as a protective layer, and in some cases, this acted toward protecting the artwork from the intense heat. Still, these rational explanations could not convince the people who survived the fires that the painting was not cursed. Drawing from personal loss and destruction, they looked for answers, which for many came in the form of the unscathed painting being a symbol of their misfortune. The cultural psychology of superstition. It is rare indeed that beliefs in curses and other supernatural phenomena do not surface at times when there is confusion or crisis, and it proved to be no different in the case of this painting. As a way of explaining why such blame was attributed to the painting, one considers the psychological and cultural factors that feed these types of beliefs. Superstition is ingrained in human psychology and surfaces when people are faced with an occurrence that defies easy explanation. During a crisis, a house burning down, for example, people seek patterns or scapegoats that will help them understand what transpired. This is called apophenia, which is a human tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated events. In the case of The Crying Boy, the emotional impact of the painting was enhanced by the fire stories presented in the media, and it was fertile ground for superstition to take hold. The picture of a tearful child is powerful and evocative. To see it unscathed after the destruction of fires was almost like an association was being made between the child and the fire. In fact, the causation theory explained a lot in such a simple manner for an event so complex and traumatic. Culturally, the 1980s were a period of growing anxiety in the UK. The amalgamation of economic instability with a rise in unemployment and political turmoil culminated in an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. It is in such context that people would be more open to stories of curses and supernatural forces as explanations for misfortunes affecting them, material and scientific explanations. Where superstition prevails with an explanation as to why events have unfolded surrounding the Crying Boy, a more scientific approach gives clarity as to how the paintings may have survived the fires. This chapter addresses both the materials involved in the fires and the physics, along with how they interacted with the artwork. Copies of The Crying Boy were mass-produced using materials that, in some cases, might have served to preserve them. Many of the prints were executed on canvas treated with fire-retardant varnish. Such varnish applied to protect the art from destruction may have helped in preserving the prints during the fires. Besides that of the varnish, another point is that of the placing of paintings themselves within the home. Many were placed upon walls which fell away from the main source of the fire. Most fires move in a manner of least resistance, in which items placed in specific spots within the room can be touched less by the flames. The materials surrounding a fire contribute to how the latter works. A number of reported cases involved fires fully fueled by highly flammable materials: curtains, furniture, electrical appliances. Such materials burn fast, thus leaving the painting unburned where the fire did not achieve its full strength. They also pointed out how fire scientists, given the way heat would disseminate from the premises, can also take into account other surviving objects. For instance, if the painting had a place in an area where heat could dissipate more easily, say near a door or window, then damage to it would be minimal. These rational explanations do nothing to dispel the fact that an inordinate amount of people still believe that the painting is, in fact, cursed, and thus challenges the often contradictory and deeply ingrained way superstition can become a part of an individual's psyche, despite scientific evidence that refutes this notion. Case studies, real-life stories of the cursed crying boy. Perhaps one of the most well-known cases associated with the supposed curse was that of Ron and May Hall from Rotherham. One such experience belonged to the Halls, which happened in 1985 when a fire gutted their home. The fire originated from an electrical fault in their kitchen, but what came afterward would shock the local community. The painting called The Crying Boy was intact, while the rest of the house was charred and burnt. This paradox has left the Halls and the firemen who attended to the call baffled, adding steam to the growing superstition that the painting brings upon a household. The Halls were in a state of utter distress when they saw the painting still whole among the remains of their house. While some rational explanations have been given, such as that it was in a corner into which the fire did not spread, the impact was emotional. The Hall family took the painting out of their house, and just like many people, they felt it could continue bringing them bad luck. This became a metaphor for the pervasive fear the painting engendered across the UK. The Hall family's story is by no means an isolated incident. There were numerous reports in the mid-1980s, each of which told a similar story where house fires occurred without doing any damage to the painting titled The Crying Boy, while everything else got reduced to ashes. Firefighters from Yorkshire, in a report that came out in 1985, indicated that they had attended more than 50 incidents of fires where the painting remained untouched. These accounts began to follow a familiar pattern: accidental fires, immense property damage, and the unscathed portrait of the crying child hanging on a wall. One such story spoke about the case of a married couple living in Nottingham who actually lost most of their belongings due to a fire. However, the crying boy painting still hung upon their wall, fine as ever. In another case, it was an elderly woman with her house in East London who reported that when her house started a fire, all things burned down to cinders, leaving her crying boy print in perfect shape. This was the survivorship trend in action. People started publicly calling for paintings to be destroyed. Lots of people burned their prints. A few public bonfires were held to watch the prints being thrown into the flames. Accounts say that even in an attempt to destroy the painting, many prints would not easily burn, adding to the credibility of the curse. Interviews with survivors and experts. The survivors' testimonies. Haunting experiences. Perhaps one of the more intriguing elements of the crying boy curse is deeply personal in nature, that which survivors have reportedly experienced. Many persons interviewed spoke of an emotional attachment to the painting, a degree of attachment that seemed to have deepened following the tragic fires. To some, the painting represented comfort before disaster, a gentle reminder of innocence and suffering that is part of childhood. For these people, after their fires occurred, they became convinced that the painting was connected with their misfortune. For example, David Brown, whose house burnt down to ashes in 1986, narrates how he was overcome with an eerie feeling of dread when he discovered the painting intact amidst the ashes. "It didn't make sense," he said in an interview. "How could everything else be gone? And yet this one painting survived. It felt like a bad omen." David did what many others did after the incident. He got rid of the painting, even though he had never believed in the supernatural beforehand. Many firefighters attending such incidents spoke to tear out the rumors about the crying boy. Essex firefighter John Dickinson, who has stumbled upon the painting in several fire-damaged homes, has spoken to the press saying, "It's all coincidence. I've seen hundreds of fires in my time, and the things that survive often do so because of where they're placed or the materials they're made of. I don't believe there's anything supernatural about it." Despite their trying to rationalize the phenomenon, the firefighters' testimonies often had the opposite effect. To those already predisposed to believe in its curse, the frequency with which they encountered it in houses where a fire was burning only seemed to add mystery. Both psychologists and cultural experts alike have commented with valuable insights into the psychological mechanisms that predispose individuals to believe in curses and other supernatural phenomena. According to Dr. Harriet Shepard, a cultural psychologist, the human brain is wired to seek out patterns and connectivity, especially when it comes to trauma. When people experience something as devastating as a house fire, their minds look for meaning in the chaos. Dr. Shepard says, it is survived in one's minds about the survival of one thing, such as a painting, and they start connecting it with the disaster even though there's no cause. This phenomenon, called apophenia, may explain why the Crying Boy painting became a focal point of fear for so many. The emotional weight of the image, along with the destruction caused by the fires, had combined in a perfect storm of a modern-day urban legend. How the media perpetuated the myth. The British tabloid, The Sun, was at the center of the curse of the Crying Boy. Their first 1985 story of firefighters who found the painting unblemished among the ruins of numerous house fires sent both fear and fascination running. Over succeeding weeks and months, The Sun continued its stories about the painting, complete with personal testimonials from those claiming to be cursed by the painting. This type of sensational reporting created a self-sustaining feedback loop. The more people who believed that the painting was the cause of their ills, the more sensational the reporting became. The Sun framed this story as if it was some kind of paranormal event. Therefore, it extended the fear and superstition associated with the painting into a national phenomenon. The media's role in shaping public perception about the curse is a prime example of how stories can take on a life of their own. For instance, in the case of the Crying Boy, the media portrayals of the painting as a harbinger of disaster drew on the already entrenched fears and superstitions, feeding a moral panic. Those who never would have believed in the existence of curses were being taken in, even by the hysteria of the stories constantly spreading about the linkage of that painting with tragedy. Media scholars have commented that such reporting often draws upon deep-seated cultural anxieties, wherein everyday objects are imbued with symbolic value pertaining to society-wide fears. During the 1980s, an era of economic uncertainty and social upheaval in the UK, the story of the Crying Boy curse was a conduit for popular anxieties, whereby those sentiments could be cast out onto an easily grasped object. The modern afterlife of the Crying Boy. Digital urban legends, the revival of the curse. The urban legend of the Crying Boy has enjoyed a new lease on life in the modern digital era via online forums and social media. Websites with an association with urban legends and all things paranormal have kept the story in the spotlight, where individuals can discuss their own experiences and ideas relating to the painting. This digital revival has thrown the story into another gear, and today it is well known to a whole different generation, most of whom were still not born during the initial 1980s media frenzy. Amateur sleuths on Reddit and YouTube have attempted to uncover the truth behind the Crying Boy, including individuals running experiments into whether the painting would, in fact, emerge from fire unscathed. These fresh takes on the curse are what transpires when an older myth gets recast and recycled within a new cultural context. Modern afterlife of the Crying Boy. The resurgitation of the curse in digital culture. With the rise of digital culture and online communities, the curse of the Crying Boy has taken on a new lease on life. From subreddit threads to YouTube channels specializing in the paranormal, this legend of a cursed painting lives on. The mystery is just as fascinating to today's citizens as it was back in the 1980s. The means have now changed the internet. Other people in different online forums also share personal anecdotes in which there were unexplained fires or other bizarre events that had to do with the painting. Content creators on YouTube delve deep into exploring the history and legend of the Crying Boy, mixing historical fact with paranormal investigation. Such modern interpretations further the spooky elements of the curse and discard the far more rational explanations of fire investigators and scientists. The diffusion of urban legends through virtual networks illustrates the broader resuscitation of myth and folklore in front of new audiences. In much the same way that the traditional ghost story has undergone subtle modification at each telling, so too has the tale of the Crying Boy, as at every point it is newly refined to resonate with contemporary sensibilities yet retain its core elements of myth. Ghost hunting and paranormal TV appearances in contemporary media. The emergence of paranormal television programming. Paranormal investigation shows have rejuvenated public interest in the painting The Crying Boy over the years. Shows such as Most Haunted and Ghost Adventures have been tackling the reputation of mystery, stereotyping the painting to see if indeed this curse is true. Such shows often combine interviews with experts, historical analysis, and on-site investigations in homes where the painting reportedly was involved in fires. While most paranormal investigators remain skeptical about the actual existence of a curse, these programs realize the entertainment value of the legend. Quite often, the story of the Crying Boy becomes a framework for broader discussions of the paranormal, tapping into humanity's enduring fascination with the unknown. Documentary films have told the story of the Crying Boy in various ways. In addition to entertainment, a number of them introduced a more discreet manner of telling the story. They told about the historical context in which the mass production of the painting and the connection with fires were born. They also included comments from art historians, psychologists, and fire experts on why the painting has remained such a potent symbol of misfortune. For instance, one such documentary investigated the very origins of the curse through interviews with survivors from the fires and delved into the role of the media in setting in stone this myth. The film was balanced, paying homage to both the fear and the psychological explanations underlying belief in curses while addressing scientific realities about fire safety and preservation. Debunking the Curse. One of the most plausible explanations for why the Crying Boy painting survived house fires is because of the materials used in the print creation. Research into the mass-produced prints of the painting found that many were treated with fire-retarding varnish, which can explain why they often emerged unscathed from fires. Fire-resistant varnishes are made to resist extremely high temperatures and safeguard the covered surface. In this case, it is quite possible that this was the varnish that worked as a protective layer for the Crying Boy, which survived when other things totally caught fire. Fire investigators who studied houses in which the painting survived explained that placing it outside the more fire-susceptible regions of a house high on walls, away from sources of immediate combustion, further contributed to its survival. Moreover, mass production of prints involved that there was variation in materials used, some of which were more fire-resistant. Therefore, the apparent random survival of prints can be brought about by their material properties and the behavior of fires being immensely unpredictable. Even with all the more plausible, rational explanations from fire scientists and material analysts, the public still acknowledges the painting's curse. This resilient belief is a sign of the strength of superstition and the way humans seek meaning in any arbitrary or disturbing event. When an intense fire has occurred, to see one single object survive, most especially one with an emotionally charged image like the Crying Boy can be, it seems more than coincidence. This idea is a cognitive bias, as psychologists studying the phenomenon have pointed out that a natural tendency of human nature is to seek out patterns in random events. Added to the emotive power of the painting, this goes some way in explaining why so many people have persisted in believing in the curse despite there being no scientific basis for believing in its existence. The legacy of the Crying Boy, a modern urban legend. With time, the Crying Boy has taken its rightful place among modern urban legends. Similar to other well-known cursed objects like the Hope Diamond, King Tut's tomb, or even the haunted doll Annabelle, this painting forms part of the broader cultural narrative on the supernatural and unexplained today. Its story is ongoing and keeps being narrated and re-narrated in various contexts, from online forums to paranormal podcasts. The bequeathed painting is a continued reminder of the power that folklore has to shape human behavior and belief. In an age when scientific advancement and rationalism have taken center stage, stories like The Crying Boy have been able to hold humanity's imagination captive and stir deep-seated fears of misfortune and the unknown, a symbol of fear and resilience. Ultimately, the Crying Boy is not just a painting, but a symbol of terror and resilience. To the superstitious, it is an icon of the powers of malignancy, visiting destruction and despair. By the same virtue, others view it as a testification to the basic human compulsion to find meaning in tragedy, even when such meaning is predicated upon superstition and myth. The stories of the Crying Boy type will doubtless remain part of our cultural landscapes for as long as human beings are prone to investigate the mysteries of times gone by, both for cautionary ends and as a fascinating glimpse into the ways in which we make sense of the world around us. Thank you for spending time with us through Spookscope today. Feel free to share your knowledge and wisdom in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends and family. Until next time, my dear spooker, stay curious.